Okay, everything's ready. We announced.
I'm ready to rock.
Ready to go. Let's fucking suck it out. I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to unmute you
Let's go.
in 1, 2, and 3.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 60 of Lore Lords.
Pat, why are you laughing so hard?
I don't know. I am one of your hosts, Pat Weston, joined, as always, by the ever so effervescent Atlas tonight.
Did Atlas say something silly before this recording started?
Yes.
I guess we'll never know. Actually, you could include it in the.
I could.
You could include it in the YouTube upload.
We'll see.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Lore Lords. This is episode 60. It's good to be here. It's good to be back.
It is.
It's another live Thursday. Do you remember what we did last week?
We did, Alexander Part 1. I'm just kidding. I remember.
It's Alexander Part 2.
We did. I do remember.
Easily could have been a 3-part. Decided to just do a quicker series on this. We could move on in our lives. Because as much as I like talking about this stuff, I also like doing wild, crazy shit. And I'm going to tell you right now, the next episode after this is going to be fucking insane. So, it is something really weird. We're going into hard, weird town next week. But this week, we're staying...
I live in hard, weird town, baby.
Where you're hard and weird all day.
Oh, 24/7.
This week we're going back into Alexander Part 2. I don't even have an intro. Normally I do like a page and a half, a half a page or page long like intro part. I didn't even do it this time. I just jumped right fucking into it.
Dude, that's hot.
But just to give a little summary of last week's, we talked about Alexander the Great, and I mentioned that we're going to start doing a Lore Lord series following like military history, cool stuff like that, and how people changed the face of our planet through history. And the first episode is the first part is Alexander the Great. That's as far back as I want to start with this.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
and we technically talked about this. We talked about earlier ones like Gilgamesh and stuff.
We did have a Gilgamesh episode, but I didn't want to go like too deep into like Egypt, especially because it's got a lack of records, so it doesn't have a lot of detail. So we're basically starting this. We have a lot of historical historians did a lot of work on Alexander the Great, so we have accounts from first and second-hand sources. And last week we did his whole background. We started where he comes from, what his life was in Macedonia growing up, helping his dad secure Greece for Macedonia, his dad getting murdered right in front of him. And
him thinking his dad was trying to murder him.
He had a really weird issue with his dad, thinking he was trying to kill him when he allegedly wasn't. Then his dad got killed.
I do love the idea of his dad just being like, "Hey, what the fuck's wrong with you? I'm not trying to kill you. You're my son. Jesus Christ.
This isn't Game of Thrones. What are you doing?"
And then he dies later. It's like, oh, it is Game of Thrones.
So yeah, we covered his adventures going through Greece and conquering that, and starting his conquests in the Persian Empire, which was the biggest power at the time. Where he started, he crossed the Mediterranean into what's modern day Turkey, known as Asia Minor, where he started taking land and basically shooketh the Persian leaders, who didn't know that this upstart for Macedonia would be a problem.
And he was all like 20 years old at the time.
Yeah, he's like 20. So he did that, and then last we left off at the Battle of Granicus, where he had made his way to open the gate to the area of Helicarnassus, which is where we're going to start today. And I'm going to jump into it right now so we can get started. Because this one is longer than a normal episode. So we got some information. So the very last thing that happened, like I mentioned, is he took Sardia, which is an untakeable city at the time. It was famous,
quote unquote.
Everyone was like, Sardia's like, that's like the Persian like stronghold to Greece. No one can take it. People have tried, and Alexander literally just walked into it basically and took it without much issue, because he killed their whole army beforehand. And this was a problem because Persia realized that this guy from Macedonia might actually be dangerous. and not just some random person they need to not care about. So Alexander, after taking Sardia, knew that he had to move quickly. So he immediately left the city and went to Halicarnassus, which we talked about before, which is an area called Caria. Right now, it is not a modern city; it's a ruin. You can visit it if you want. There's a lot of ruins there. It's on the east or the west coast of Turkey, and it was known now it's known for the mausoleum Halicarnassus. You've probably heard of that.
I have.
It's just one of the seven wonders.
Yes.
So it was pretty new during this period too. That building was only like 10 years old when Alexander went there.
It probably looked really clean.
Yeah. And this city was a port. It was a massive port city where the Persian navy was docked, and it had control over the entire Mediterranean from this location. So it was a big deal, and many people never even got an attempt to attack Halicarnassus before this because they couldn't get past the cities around it. So on his way down, he knows that Halicarnassus is different. It is a Greek city-state. It is not Persian by nature. It was founded by Greeks.
Right.
And the people in Halicarnassus were actually separate from other city-states because they had a whole monarchy.
Right.
And while the other people from like Ionia, which we talked about last week that Alexander attacked, would rebel against Persian rule and stay Greek, when Halicarnassus was like approached by Persia, they just sided with them. They never fought back.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's pretty vulnerable, though, in some ways, too. If you're especially, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. I think they had such governmental differences that lined up more with Persian ways than Greek ways.
Makes sense.
That they kind of just decided to side with Greece. And this also gave a lot of bad blood between Greeks and the people of Halicarnassus, that they were so willing to just be Persian. And after this point, Alexander had been constantly harassed by Persia's navy because he didn't really have a navy. He was doing a land war, and the navy was able to move around the water, stop supplies from getting to him, and also fire at him from the water, basically where he had no way to attack them. And the Persian navy would stop at Halicarnassus, and this is when Alexander would begin his attempt to take the city because he was now free from the harassment for a moment. Fortunately, there was actually recent drama in the Persian Empire, which removed a woman named Ada of Caria, who was the queen of Halicarnassus, from the throne, because she was a bit less down with the Persian rule. So they kicked her off the throne, and what they did
Did they kill her, or
no.
did they just like throw her in jail?
No.
Okay.
So the people wouldn't rebel. They kept her around, and she was, a queen. But what they did is they didn't let her even live in the city. They put her in a fort outside the city, which was the whole thing defending the city. Was the fort of Halicarnassus.
Okay, so they
So
they put her in a box to look at. Everybody could look at her.
Yeah, I mean it's probably was a very big place with a lot of like stuff in it, but like it was a fortress for military reasons to stop people from getting to Halicarnassus. So she's leading this thing, and when Alexander shows up, she just surrenders it to him. She's basically in the stage of fuck the Persians. I'm with you.
Duh.
Let's do this.
Let's rock, brother.
Yeah, so Alexander arrived at 334 BCE, which...
he's also hot, so...
He is... if the arts and statues are anything to go by, he's a pretty hot dude.
Yeah.
Also, I want to mention on that topic that there's two depictions of Alexander, historically. One, he's like this like angelic blonde dude, and the other, he's just like a ripped, muscular Mediterranean dude. Obviously, it's the ripped, muscular Mediterranean dude more so.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't probably a white blonde guy from fucking the Mediterranean. So, but I love that there's like all like the Renaissance art of Alexander. He's just like wearing all white armor with a flowing white, and he's all white and pretty. Yeah. But then the older art, he's all brown. So sure, whitewashing history. So 334 BCE, Alexander takes the fortress with Ada at his side, and all the forces there join his army as well. And the current satrap of Caria was a man named Orontobates, and he had an ally called Menmon of Rhodes, a name you might know.
Rhodes?
Menmon of Rhodes, specifically. He's kind of a legendary figure. He was from Rhodes, obviously, but he was a military commander that was like one of the great at this time, probably the greatest Greek military commander in the world. Like legend, what everyone thought. Like you're like, oh shit, if he's there, you're fucked. But he did join the Persian side
Oh, yikers. Big yikers.
To help kind of subdue the Greeks into the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And he was at Halicarnassus at this time, and he ended up entrenching his forces in the city to stop Alexander. Macedonia would send spies, and they would go into the city and try to stir up alleged population of dissidents that Queen Ada said was there. She was like, there's a bunch of people that hate the Persians like me. Go stir them up. But when Alexander never heard back from the spies, he figured, things maybe they were going as planned, and they were supposed to open the gates at night. So he shows up with his army, but the gates are still closed. So either the spies failed or there was no dissidents. We don't actually know. Sure. I think the likely answer is the spies just failed. So when he arrives and sees nothing, the Persians notice him, and so a battle starts. They start firing him from the walls. Alexander starts getting his men to start pickaxing the walls down like they do back then, and try to get that as good as they can. But he was quickly repelled because Memnon of Rhodes had this thing called catapults.
Heard of them?
Which were very good at stopping infantry from doing that when they're not moving. So after the siege bombardment happened, Alexander had to go back and reform his troops in a line as best he could, and then Memnon of Rhodes sent his elite Greek infantry forward with himself at the thing to meet him, and this seemed like it was to be the first defeat of Alexander. Except,
however,
at the same time, another smaller group of his troops pickaxed a section of the wall down in a different area of the city and got in, and with it were being led by companions and got to the backside of Memnon's troops and destroyed them all.
Oh my god. This is like sent a bunch of guys like, hey, just go dig through the wall over there.
There was like a couple hundred dudes that picked through a wall, and then that let the companion cavalry come through, and they flanked Memnon's troops and completely killed them inside the city. Memnon did not...
that in Total War Rome.
Yeah, that's kind of what you do in all Total War games. Just break down a part of the wall their troops aren't at. So Memnon did escape the battle, and before he left, he ended up setting fire to Halicarnassus because he didn't want Alexander to have the resources of the city. So if
I can't win, you all lose.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty old war tactic to be like, we can't give him the advantage, so let's just destroy the city. So he set fire to it, and Alexander was trying his best to put out, and they did eventually put out the fire, but the city was about like 45% destroyed.
Yikes.
So Alexander ended up actually relinquishing control of the province of Caria to Queen Ada again. Said, you know what? You did good by us. You're now in charge of this place. Under me.
That's
of course.
Actually, well, yeah, of course. But that's still, for monarchy rule at the time, that's pretty generous.
Yeah, and as another form of generosity, Queen Ada adopted Alexander as her son.
Oh, okay. That's not the the name Ada, I was expecting it to get a little different.
It's A-D-A. Ada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ada. Queen Ada adopted him, which what that does in the old ways of the monarchy means that when she died, all lands go to him. So basically, she made him the legitimate successor to Halicarnassus.
That's pretty dope.
But what this did do was it made the people of the city very favorable to Alexander, and they treated him very well in return. Because they were treated much better than they were under Persians, and this made the people of Halicarnassus very loyal to Alexander. And they gave him full supplies as best they could with a half-burned-down city. And I think his men also helped build the city back up for a little bit, kind of thing, while they were there for a couple months.
Sure.
But he was able to get resupplies from Greek now, because the navy, also the large Persian navy, was destroyed because they were docked at this thing, which got set on fire.
Yeah.
So they burned down most of their own navy. So with Halicarnassus under his control, he was able to go deep into the mountains of Lycia, which, if you don't know Turkey, it is an extremely mountainous area. And there's a big mountain range, which he was able to take all the small towns there, and then an area called the Pamphylian Plain after that, which is the big flat area in the center of Turkey, which he basically was able to see if any Persians were coming, which made it impossible for Persia to attack from the area, which allowed Alexander to just continue down the coast, taking Persian cities until the ships that were still around for Persia didn't have anywhere to dock anymore.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll basically open up the whole sea for you.
So yeah, that's how you stop navies if you don't have one. Is just don't let them get food ever again.
Yeah,
stick them at sea.
It also sounds like Alexander was exceptionally good at just using terrain. Like,
Yeah.
he used that big field, basically, not field, but like,
Yeah, he
open
was
area
good
to
at
be
using.
like, well, if they come, we're gonna know.
Yeah, he was good at using everything, which is why he was so able to do what he's doing. Also, I tried to look up what actually happened to the Persian Navy, and there's not a ton of records, but there is stories of Persian ships surrendering to Greece and Italy at the time. The Italian, like, going to, like, Rome and places like that, and surrendering people who weren't at war with them just because they couldn't live at the sea anymore. So I think they literally lost their almost entire navy at this point.
Damn.
So he would go down to an area called Pisidia, and this is a place we actually don't know much about this part of the war. There's not a lot of history. We just know that he, quote-unquote, humbled the military forces here. He did do a very famous part, though, where he stopped at the capital city of ancient Phrygia, which is a nation you might have heard of in, like, Age of Empires. They had a capital city called Gordium. This was an area where there was an unsolvable tied rope, which was there, known as the Gordian knot. You might have heard of this. And it was a giant rope that was hanging from the city in a knot that was said to be unsolvable unless it was untied by the prophesied future king of Asia.
Damn.
So what did Alexander do?
Solved the knot.
He chopped the rope off, so the knot fell undone.
That's funny.
And so this is a very famous legend, which is actually a metaphor nowadays. People say the Gordian knot, which means taking the simple way forward instead of the complex one. Right. Because it didn't say anything about which the seers of the city said. It didn't say anything about untying it. Just said undo the knot, which he did. He cut the rope and undid it. So at this point, those people became loyal to him, thinking he was the prophesied king.
Yeah, that's also Asia's very big, though. I want to point.
Yeah, so I also want to be clear: in the ancient world, Asia was not China was not part of Asia.
Right.
Asia was the Middle East and Turkey and not even India, really. People, whenever they would describe forces from, like, India east, it would be described as Oriental troops, Oriental people. Right. The word Asia didn't encompass that. Yeah, it's a hard thing to say now because there's such historical meaning to it, but it is definitely a racial term. A racist term. So don't say it if you can. But after this, Alexander would march into Syria, and at this time, great King Darius noticed Alexander and was very worried. He knew Alexander was his main threat. He organized a massive army and quickly outmaneuvered Alexander because his army was just too big, actually taking a city from Alexander called Issus. Alexander wasn't there at the time. He took the city of Issus, and then what this did was it was the only link back to Greece. So Darius got around him and captured his big city. So Alexander's like, fuck, we need to go back. We have no choice.
Right.
It's also, we believe that this is the city called Iskandarum today. It's a current city, and it has ruins in it, and we think that this is the city of Isis, but we're not sure, in modern-day Turkey.
Oh, cool.
So Alexander would have to turn back and meet Darius, the great king of Persia, in the field in Part 2, the Battle of Isis and the Siege of Tyre.
Oh, you guys fucking ready? Sorry.
Or Tyre?
Let's go.
I think technically it's Tyre, because it's Tyrian people. I think it's Tyre.
Right. Like Tears of the Kingdom.
It's T-Y. Tyre. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Tyre. Anyway, it's not called Tyrians. They're called Tyrians, but I think you do say Tyre when talking about city. I'm not sure. Anyway, this was the first battle between the actual Persian army led by Great King Darius, where our hero Alexander goes against him on the field. So Darius knew Isis was a major point. So he could not maneuver the army into the pass of Jonah, which was another area south of where he was going. Alexander was going to the pass of Jonah, which would allow him basically into Persia proper. So Darius is like, well, if we cut off Isis, he'll just starve to death in the heat of the desert. So we need to do that. So what he did was a very smart move. Darius was, for the record, an extremely good tactician, an extremely good military commander. He was the emperor, great king of Persia, as he's called, but he was better at the battlefield than being a king. That's pretty much what the records say. Alexander also had to leave many sick and wounded men in Isis, when he moved forward, and Darius found all these Macedonian troops and cut their hands off so they could never fight again.
Yeah, that's mean.
That's pretty fucked. So Alexander was on his way back to meet him, and let's talk about numbers. Let's get into nerdy numbers here. Persia's force, as per usual, much larger than Macedonia. The numbers do vary. Once again, keep in mind, this is done by everything from Greek to Roman to modern historians, so I'm going with the modern historians who are not biased, because they're not part of this war. Some reports say the Persian army of Great King Darius was 600,000 men. Historians say that is literally impossible. You could not control 600,000 men on the field. No one had ever controlled more than 100,000 men by themselves on the field at this time period due to communication time.
Yeah, right.
This changes in the near future because they get better ways of talking to long distance, but at this rate, that was impossible. So it is believed that he did have a 600,000 person army, but he did have a 100,000 person contingent, which broke off to ISIS, with the other 500,000 elsewhere, back at home.
Right.
Now, if you want to think about 600,000 people, think about like a baseball stadium full of people is like maximum like 12,000 to 25,000 people.
Oh, sure.
Now think 600,000. That's a lot of fucking dudes.
Oh, right. No, I mean, like, this is why when we talk about this stuff, I genuinely think about like Total War Rome 2 or something. Because first of all, it's basically this time period, and so like it's and you can't even have that many people on the field in that game. So like trying to imagine the scale of that, like putting that many people on, it's one of the, it's like, it looks like one of those crazy TikToks you see of like somebody who has a simulator where they literally put like 1 million Jedi versus like 2 million T-Rexes or something.
Yeah.
Like
it
looks like that.
Yeah. It's hard to fathom that size of an army.
And they would fight each other.
So this is what the estimates think of were at the field, which is over 100,000. But this is what the number breakdown we have from historical records, kind of averaging out to the non-biased opinions, are at this battle of Isis, Darius controlled 108,000 men, infantry, 11,000 cavalry, 10,000 Greek mercenaries, and 10,000 of the feared elite Persian immortals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if you've seen 300, you've probably seen the immortals. They were an elite unit of heavy infantry armed with shield and spear, who also were able to be heavy cavalry. They were trained in both. They usually had armored horses as well as armor on themselves, which was rare for Persian armies to be wearing armor. So they were the heavy force. So this massive Persian force would line up in a formation with the right wing on the Gulf of Isis and the left wing on the Panaris River. So once again, they had water on both sides, which prevented any kind of flanking from happening. Another thing to make up for, to explain, to make up, these massive numbers, his infantry, there was 10,000 Greek mercenaries. The immortals, maybe 10,000. We don't know if they were on horseback or not. We think it was just both at this time. Right. But as far as infantry, the rest of the troops were either Indian or Chinese, likely, who were from the farthest reaches of the Persian Empire, all the way east. They never made it to China, but we do know that they did trade with China, and we do know they had a large slave population from China that were sold to them from the Han Dynasty. So it's likely that they did have Chinese soldiers who would not know how to fight. For the record, they were not trained soldiers if they were there.
Oh, yikes.
They were just peasants holding spears and shields. Also, probably didn't speak the language. So,
yikes.
There's that.
You don't, have any say in your life back
then. You really don't. You're just a piece of meat. That's just your life. Doesn't matter where you're from. So the Hellenic forces, on the other side, had 40,000 men, led by Alexander the Great. His forces are recorded as being 24,000 heavy infantry, 13,000 light infantry, which included archers and slingers, 5,850 heavy cavalry, which includes his elite companion cavalry. Alexander led his companions on the on the right flank of his army, and his allied Thessalian cavalry, which we talked about before, which are kind of like the light cavalry. Right. They were on the left with his phalanx troops, which was in charge of his strategist, a man named Parmenion. Darius, on the other hand, led his force right from the middle. He wanted to be in the very middle of the battle, so he was kind of like in the middle behind the infantry, like watching over. It is also reported that he may have well been on a throne, similar to 300. Remember how Xerxes was like
Xerxes.
Yeah. This is the same basic empire. This is the Persian Empire after that Persian Empire. So it's not much different.
There's still show-offs, yeah.
So it's likely he probably wasn't as great as the one from 300. That's obviously a comic book and done out of proportion.
Right.
But it probably was on a carried throne, or maybe on a throne pulled, or a chariot with a horse, something crazy.
Something, yeah, something just big, showy, and telling everybody I have got the biggest balls in the room.
Which for Alexander was great because he says, "I see you, and I'm going to come kill you." Because Alexander, as we know, was extremely good at killing people. He was an actual soldier, and he went for commanders. He played very smart. He didn't go by the rules of honor and warfare at this time. He went to win. So that's the thing to point out, is that he knew where Darius was the whole battle. So,
I feel like I feel like you're almost foreshadowing for us.
Not quite. That's not going to happen. They're not going to actually fight in this battle, but it does kind of keep that in mind. The battle begins with a Persian cavalry charge. Remember we talked about they didn't do that last time? They're learning. They had their heavy cavalry, which is probably the Immortals, charge first into the Greek phalanx, where they slammed against Greek shields but could not break through.
Yikes. Well, they just learned how to do it, so. That
being said, things did not go good for the Greek forces, as they now had to advance across a river, a small river, but a river, up of not like a swimming river, like a wading river, basically. Right, they had to cross that with their infantry and then go up a fortified bank towards the army. So they had a huge disadvantage against their opponent, which at this time, directly ahead of them, was Greek mercenaries. So they knew how the Greeks fought. And were much better than the shitty Persian troops or shitty Persian, slave conscript troops.
Yeah.
What we know about this, we do know that Parmenion kept trying to move his men up that hill. We don't know if he was ordered to by Alexander or not, but the history did note that 120 Macedonian officers were slain at this battle.
Oof.
During that
Big
force.
F, dude.
Yeah. So they lost a lot of higher ranking soldiers trying to push up that hill. The Macedonians did end up having to retreat across the river, and the light cavalry, the Thessalian ones, struggled against the mass of Persian heavy cavalry, likely the Immortals, and they had to retreat as well. But Parmenion did his job, which was just to hold out long enough for Alexander to make a move. If you remember the Hypastists we talked about before from Age of Mythology,
the better trained,
the elite, fully armored head to toe troops, they were led on foot by Alexander to deliver an assault on the Persian line. Showing their superior skills in battle, they routed the undertrained peasant soldiers, likely in a force of about 10-1 in numbers. So for every single Greek, every single Hypasus would kill 10 Persian infantry. They also defeated the entire force of Persian skirmishers, which was their javelin troops, which allowed them to have a secured flank. They didn't have to worry about ranged fighting anymore. And now Alexander mounted his horse. If you remember, we talked about last time, Bucephalon, his famous horse. He got on that horse and headed the companion cavalry into a direct assault going towards Darius.
Because he knew where he was.
Yeah, and he noticed that the left flank was in trouble, though. His own army, the one that we were talking about, the light cavalry was losing, and the middle force was going up that hill. So Alexander saw this in the battle, and instead of going for the great king to kill him, he decided to help his own men. And he ended up going and attacking the Greek mercenary force from behind, defeating the entire force, which was blocking Parmenion's advance. And then when they advanced up the hill, the rest of the Persian army began to flee.
Damn. That's good, though. He went back to help his boys.
Yeah, no, he did the smart move. He decided to, you know what, if I kill a king, they're just going to get a new one. So I need to keep my armies going. So, so Darius fled, and when the rest of the Persians realized Darius fled, they just left. They're like, fuck, we need to go. Like, that. If he's gone, we're gone kind of thing.
Right. I mean, Darius basically, he probably literally counted on, like, the Immortals and the Greek mercenaries to do all the heavy lifting and have, like, his big stack of people basically be a wall between him and the other people. Like, he didn't,
And the casualty numbers were probably around 50 to 60,000 for Persia and around 200 for the Greek forces.
Get fucked.
So, pretty good KD ratio for that battle. The battle was won for Alexander, and his cavalry pursued the fleeing Persians for as long as there was sunlight in the sky. That's what the historians wrote. They basically just tried to chase and kill as many as they could because they knew they would just come back otherwise. Alexander's companion Ptolemy mentioned in record that while pursuing Darius, Alexander and his cavalry were able to cross the river behind the forces because without getting wet, due to the river now being blocked and filled with a dam of Persian bodies. So,
the imagery is there.
Yeah, that's how they were able to get over the river. So, record states it was a decisive victory for Hellenic forces, and with Darius gone, the city fell back into control of Alexander. But there was something waiting for him in Isis, and that was Sisygambis, the mother of Darius. Yeah, Sisygambis. It's literally exactly how it's spelled. Sisygambis. It's like the X-Men Gambit being a sissy, but with an S on the end instead of a T. Sisygambis.
Yeah, he's wearing little assless chaps and bending over and going, ooh, a lot.
Yeah, so just picture that, but instead, the mother of Darius is what they did. And Stateria the First, his wife, and their two daughters, Stateria II and Drypestis. Because Darius often campaigned with his family because, he never lost. So there was no danger to bring his family with him.
Of course.
And he didn't go back to Isis to get them. He left the battlefield. So Alexander went back to Isis and found his family there. And apparently Alexander was appalled by this. He thought this was disgusting, that he would not only bring his wife, mom, and daughters into battle areas with him, but leave them behind.
Yeah.
So it is said
So he mercy killed them.
So he just took them out in their sleep. No, he treated them with the utmost respect, and even started a close relationship with Darius' daughter, Stateria II, who he would marry.
Ooh, I had a feeling it was going to take that route. I love this. This is great.
Yeah, so he
romantic.
He really was very nice to them. Darius also left behind something, which is a massive hoard of treasure. So
yeah, you can't do that.
So Alexander got that and sent that right back to Macedonia. Which bolstered the nation's wealth. Alexander later would receive a letter from Darius with a peace treaty. And the terms were that Alexander would keep all lands he conquered, as well as receive 10,000 talents, which is silver coins, for his family's exchange. So they give his family back 10,000 silver, and you get to keep all the land. Alexander wrote a reply back saying, quote, "Since I am now the king of Asia, it was up to me to decide all these territorial divisions."
Oh, Jesus Christ.
This was followed by him immediately invading Syria.
Oh, my God.
So he did not accept a peace offer. He sieged the city of Tyre, which was an island nation, Tyre, whatever you want to call it, in 332 BCE, which he actually wanted to ignore. He did not want to fight the Tyrians, but they wouldn't stop attacking him from their island.
Well, loyalty is nice, I guess.
So he just, he apparently attacked them, and he got so furious at their defense, because it was an island fortress, and you could not siege it how you normally would siege a city. So he ended up getting ships out in the water and sieging the city from a range, and then built a causeway from the ships to the city walls. So he had engineers build bridges connecting the boats to the city walls. And he built, and even more, the engineers built siege towers on these causeways, which would then go forward to reach the top of the walls. Unfortunately, the walls were just too high to get from the end to there was a sea cliff, right?
Right.
So the causeways are too short, so we ended up building catapults on top of the siege towers, which then tore the walls to pieces.
Man, can you imagine the engineers back then being like, all right, we'll try.
Yeah, so historical record of this time says Alexander was not pleasant to be around when normally he was, because he was so pissed off at the Tyrians. And he just really wanted this to be over, and they just kept defending, and they just kept attacking him. And he probably kept sending word, stop, I don't want to be here. But they just wouldn't give up, because, they were on the Persian side.
Yeah, that's true.
So eventually they did get through the walls, and the enraged Alexander gathered up the soldiers of Tyre that were of fighting age and cut their heads off.
Not a good move. Let the anger get the best of him there.
He Anakin Skywalkered entire.
Yeah, big time.
The nobles and leaders who were hiding in the temple, they were pardoned because he needed people to run the city, and the remaining residents were all sold into slavery to Macedon and Greece at 30,000 people.
Fuck. Yeah. Well, oof. Even oof.
So there's two things about this. A lot of people think of this as an inhumane cruelty of unnecessary anger, but there is a strategic reason to do this, looking back at the time.
Oh, sure. There's always a strategic reason to do stuff like that.
Yeah, so he was forced to act on it, firstly, which adds up to the city's history and reputation because it was the most powerful city-state of the Phoenicians. This was like the big one. So with it under his control, he couldn't leave it without them being their ally 100%. And he remembers Athens and Thebes, we talked about last time, how they kept fucking fighting him after he took it. So he just made sure his people were there in control. He had people from Macedonia move to Tyre to control the city.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what happens all the time.
Yeah, and Phoenicia, is a very old, powerful people. And while they were under the Persians at this time, they were dangerous. So he couldn't have the most powerful Phoenician city be left to revolt against him. So, with Tyre under his control, he would now move sight into another great territory of history on part 3 of the episode tonight, Egypt and the Middle East.
Oh, damn.
Without Tyre to defend them, the rest of the Phoenician lands fell under, and they basically just capitulated to Alexander without an issue, which opened up his path to Egypt. And he took it. At this time, the 31st dynasty of Egypt was a shadow of its former glory. The satrapy under the control of Persia, they were just another satrapy under the control of Persia. So they weren't like the Egypt that we know about in history, right? They were kind of baby state at this time, controlled by Persia. And this did not stop them from resisting, but they didn't have much to resist with. I'm pretty sure, from what I could understand, they were given a lot of harsh laws on how much military they could have, so that Darius was able to control them. So they had a pretty small force, and Alexander reached the city of Gaza. You probably heard of that. And he was met with heavy pushback from the fortress city, and Alexander knew he had to get through Gaza, so he had to begin a siege. His engineers warned him that the city was built on a hill, so sieging like this would be impossible. To which Alexander then just said, well, then we really have to take it to show him, don't we?
Oh, my God.
Alexander led 3 assaults on the city by siege and foot troops with pickaxes, as well as catapults hitting the walls as archers as best he could. And on the 3rd attempt, he actually even received a serious shoulder wound. We don't know what happened, but he got hurt badly. Ooh. So he had to actually stay out of battle for a while. Couple months, probably.
Pissed about that.
Yeah. So eventually, though, the city just ran out of food. And as you know, that's how sieges happened a lot back then. So they surrendered to the might of Alexander.
Siege tactics, baby. Starve them out.
Much like Tyre, the military men were put to the sword, and the women and children were sold to slavery. Egypt was seemingly, however, welcoming to Alexander. They immediately all surrendered their cities to him, likely due to being under unfair rule of the Persians.
Right.
Also, historically, they're just as much enemies as they are allies with Greece. So they get along with Greeks a lot more than Persians in history. The Egyptians did. After this happened, Alexander would visit Memphis and be taken to the temple of Ptah, who was an Egyptian god, and there he was crowned by the Egyptian people as the ruler of Egypt. It appears that the people...
Stop letting Europeans... Sorry.
Stop getting whitewashed!
Stop it!
So it appears that the people of Egypt at this time didn't even care that he was white. That's actually in my script. Likely due to his care for the Egyptian people. He would restore their temples. He would actually send his troops to repair their temples. Nice. And the Persian rulers refused to accept these gods and left them neglected. So he was like, no, worship your gods. Here, I'll help you, kind of thing. Which made people really like him.
Damn, that's so progressive.
He would, so after he restored these temples, he would erect new monuments to Egyptian gods. He would help them build statues to their gods as well, because they all got torn down by the Persians. He would also reform their tax structure to refit the Greek methods of money handling, and would reorganize their military occupation of the country to be much less controlling and allow Egypt to have their own forces led by Macedonian generals. He would leave the Egypt in 331 BCE to pursue a Persian force that he saw, but then he actually had to return to 332 BCE because he defeated nearby, because a Persian garrison basically got refilled by Persian troops while he was gone. But there is no actual record of a battle, so we don't know if he actually fought this garrison or they just surrendered. But I think he fought them because of what's about to happen after this, because he basically came in, cleared the Persians out, left to fight more Persians, and then other Persians came back in. So he immediately came back, got the Persians away again, and Egypt welcomed him as a hero and liberator.
Oh, okay.
So he actually was taken to the Siwa oasis to meet with the famous Oracle of Siwa, which was like kind of the Oracle of Delphi, but the Egyptian version, who declared that he was a legitimate pharaoh, not just a ruler.
Wow, convenient for him.
And he had to make a sacrifice to the gods. It's like, we don't know if it was a person or an animal, but he did something at this oasis, and he was the Oracle of Amun-Ra, apparently was their name. And he was pronounced the son of the...
That's a big deal.
Yes, he was pronounced the son of the deity Amun-Ra by the Oracle. And that he, in the Liberian desert, he made this huge ceremony happen where he was crowned as the name Zeus Ammon.
Sick. Nice combo.
Yeah, if you look at the history of Egypt and the pharaohs, you'll see him there. He's there, listed 31st Egyptian dynasty, Zeus Ammon. That's Alexander the Great.
That's fucking sweet.
And after his death, he is depicted in Egyptian history as having the horns of Ammon on his head too. So you'll see like a horned white dude as a pharaoh. That's Alexander the Great.
Cool.
So another thing to remember is at this time, the religion of Greek and Egypt were kind of intertwined and the same. Like, they often saw themselves as worshiping like different versions of their religion, kind of like different versions of Christianity today.
Yeah.
Like, they were completely different mythologies. Their gods, they kind of believed existed together. Like, they coexisted.
Right, and they kind of like looked after their own little sections.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's like kind of how they saw it, which is so... The Greeks, when they saw him crowned as a pharaoh of Zeus Ammon, were like, well, I guess he's like this is like prophecy, like Greek prophecy, like he's a hero, he's a demigod kind of thing. So his own people were super behind this as well. And remember, there was already those rumors that he was Zeus's son from the thing. So it's like this whole story of him being a divine being was getting backed up by the people. And this was time for him to, however, leave Egypt. He had it secured, and he decided to found a city before he go, which he would store with his own people. You may have guessed it, Alexandria.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
There's a big thing that they put there.
Yeah.
A real important thing that I rant about sometimes.
Yeah. So he founded the city of Alexandria, and then he decided, he was going to leave and go into Persia deeper now with more supplies from Egypt. And he now had control of the Mediterranean Sea as well, on at least the, Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So he was pretty set off. And also in the future, Alexandria would be the capital of the prosperous Ptolemaic Kingdom, one of the richest cities in the world, for a long time, hundreds of years after his death. The Ptolemaic Kingdom would be a major nation, which, if you remember his companion Ptolemy, maybe that's a connection. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, Egypt had been secured, but Persia was the big threat in the world still, and they did not take kindly to Alexander. They hated this guy right now. So much of their land had been lost, and Alexander was already on his way forward into the area of Assyria in Upper Mesopotamia, now known as northern Iraq. And this is where he would meet Darius on the fields of battle in the Battle of Gugalma. Darius once again would be forced to flee, and Alexander would give chase. And this would be the final time the two would do battle. Darius was lost. They lost the field. We don't really have a lot of records of the battle. I think at this time his forces were less than Alexander. Alexander now had more dudes than Persia, and he lost and just ran away. And Darius knew he could not defeat him, so he retreated over the mountains, to which Alexander was given free reign over basically all of the Middle East, and he took over Babylon. And he was known to be good to the Babylonians, much like the Egyptians. It seems to be a very similar thing. He helped them erect their temples again. He helped their gods kind of be worshipped again. There's even records from the Babylonian people at the time, writing down saying, quote, "The king of the world, Alexander, sent his scouts with a message to the people of Babylon before entering the city, quote, 'I shall not enter your houses,' end quote." So
Wow.
it seemed like he was like, he just based, that's what he said. Like, you know what? You're mine, but you could do you. Just be mine.
Yeah.
Like, not a lot of restrictions. So Babylon became loyal to him. And it seems like we don't have as much information as Egypt, but it seems very, very similar. Like, they also kind of just were treated that way.
That's just a way, like, you appeal to the masses, and what are they going to do? You know what I mean? Like, you're just
and
hey,
and their previous great king they were supposed to, like, worship, Darius, ran away.
Right.
So,
Again.
So it's just like, all right, there you go.
Yeah, well, this guy seems like a homie.
So from Babylon, Alexander went into the city of Susa, which was one of Persia's capital cities, and took it over without much resistance. And now he was in Persia proper and was able to take one of their capital cities, a feat which was thought to be impossible.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine.
He would take the treasury of Susa for his kingdom and soon leave the city for the ceremonial capital of Persia, Persepolis.
Oh, yeah.
And he would take the famous Persian Royal Road, still there today. It's got a real road on it now, but it's still the same path that his army marched on. Alexander took select troops on the direct route to the city and stormed the pass known as the Persian Gates. This is like the last Persian battle of this entire war in the modern Zagros Mountains. At this point, Persia's numbers were lesser, like I said, and ancient record holders state the Persians had 40,000 men, 700 cavalry. Modern historians think it was actually 700 men. And
oh my God!
And around 400 cavalry on the Persian side. While Alexander,
so they went hundreds of thousands to just hundreds.
Yeah, Alexander had 10,000 men in his force currently moving towards the gate. And the gate was only a couple meters wide, so it wasn't very big. It was a very small like pass that you had to get your army through. And suddenly, while he was marching, boulders began to rain down from above them on the hilltop, where Persian archers would also launch their arrows, and which inflicted heavy losses on Alexander's men.
I was going to say, they got that idea from Breath of the Wild and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. You know, that's what they probably saw those movies and were like, you know what, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So Alexander actually had to panic withdraw at the time. But due to being marching on a slope that wasn't very wide and having advancing units behind him, retreat ended up being basically impossible, and he had to make a huge sacrifice, which was leaving the dead behind to save the rest of his army, which was a huge disgrace to Macedonian culture.
Right.
That number one thing in battle was you had to recover the dead.
I mean, look, it's a good thing. It's a sign of respect at the very least.
So this was actually kind of like led to even more loyalty from his men, because they decided like that was like the cause now. We have to go forward to retrieve our dead. Like that's like what we have to take these assholes out. So preventing Macedonian forces through the gate on the side of the Persians was of the utmost importance, because it would actually change the course of the war. If Alexander could not pass through these mountains, Darius would have time to raise another army of hundreds of thousands of men. So, unfortunately for them, and after holding the gate for a month, Alexander's legendary companion Ptolemy led a force around the mountain entirely on horseback, and pincer attacked them.
Ooh,
so he literally just ran around a mountain while they were like constantly fighting. And Alexander and his elite unit attacked the Persian forces from above with a surprise attack from behind, and the Persians fell at the pass. And it's also said historically that the Persians that were inside only had shields and no swords or axes.
Oh.
That's how bad off the Persian army was. They were fighting barehanded against the Greeks, just hitting them with shields.
Yeah. Good Lord.
So with the gate fallen, Alexander wasted no time mustering the entirety of his army to head to Persepolis before its garrison could loot it and leave, which is exactly what they were doing. And when Alexander arrived, he was able to loot the city because there was no guard there. They had already ran away.
Well, yeah. Fuck it, I would.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd be like, I'm so done with this.
So Alexander rested there for 5 months, kind of taking his time there, during which a fire broke out with the temple of Xerxes I. likely in an act of revenge from him burning the Acropolis of Athens in the Second Persian War. The fire would spread out of control, however, and burn down most of Persepolis, something Alexander seems to extremely regret, and he actually has a quote, which is marked by multiple people, of him saying this, when he's standing there watching, looking at the fallen statue of Xerxes, like on the ground, saying, quote, "Shall I pass by and leave you lying there because of the expeditions you led against Greece, or shall I set you up again because of the magnanimity of and your virtues and other respects?"
He seems like he was a bit like, again, he seems like a deep man.
It seemed like, remember, his education he was extremely educated.
That's right.
So
that's right.
He was very like knowledgeable, but it seemed like he almost was like neutral and doing this because he just thought he had to and was good at it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, because that's even the way he rules too. Like his idea of I don't give a shit what you're doing in your country is just like, if a war comes calling, then you're coming with me kind of thing. Like, I mean, that's obviously not good too. He's a monarch. He killed a lot of people, obviously a lot of bad stuff. But at the same time, you're right. It almost like his attitude and the reason he was doing it wasn't so he could rule so much as it was that he could be like enough, like everybody just stop. Like I'm gonna kill all your armies, and then we can just chill out and drink wine and fuck each other. Like that's like what he wanted.
It does seem it's important not to glorify someone like this, but at the same time, compared to every other king at the time, he's definitely seems to be the coolest dude.
He does. I mean, I don't think it's hard to believe that there were genuine people back then with good intentions, depending on how they were raised and how they were educated. It was way fewer and farther between. That's the problem. You know what I mean? Like the masses weren't educated at all. Whereas if you go to America today, everybody has some form of education. Like the dumbest person in America is probably one of the smartest people at that point. Still,
exactly. And he was taught by Aristotle, who of course is a very deep, deep thinker. Like, so it's like that made him the same way. So he had he probably thought things out. He didn't act super rashly a lot.
Right. And something I always forget about too is like when people existed at the same time. So when you said that, like, oh, and then they employed Aristotle to come and teach him, I was like, of course they did.
Yeah.
Like he's around, right? Like that's a big deal for that time.
It was a very big deal.
We still use his philosophies today.
We do. And Alexander was a student. So Alexander would leave the city of Persepolis and chase Darius into his own lands, in which Darius was in a pretty big panic. No longer in control of his own kingdom, and knowing he could not stand up against Alexander, we don't know exactly what happened next, but Darius was captured by his own kinsman, a satrap named Bessus. Bessus told Alexander that he has Darius captured and he's ready to receive Alexander. And when Alexander arrived, Bessus made a very strange play, which was to stab Darius in the gut, leaving him bleeding out on the floor, declaring himself Artaxerxes V, the great king of Persia, and then running away.
Why am I laughing at that? That's so funny.
Dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, I'm the king.
You don't have an army. You don't have people. No one gives a fuck about it. It literally almost seems like he was panicking and was just kind of like it's that same thing where somebody he had somebody in his life who was telling him like, hey, you know what you could do? You should try doing this instead. You know what? And he's like, you know what? I'm gonna.
You should change your name to Xerxes V and be the
stab Darius.
He had no relation to the royal family, by the way. He just declared himself that name.
And then he ran.
Yeah, and then he ran away.
Good job being the king of literally no one.
Yeah. So he ran away and actually led a guerrilla campaign from Central Asia. I say Central Asia in their ancient sense, against Alexander. This is basically just northern Iran. That's where he was.
Yeah.
Alexander held a massive regal funeral for Darius, where he was buried with full respect and honors of a great king next to his predecessors. He claimed that while Darius was bleeding out on the floor, his last words were to claim Alexander as a successor to the Achaemenid Persian Empire.
I mean, you got spanked so many times by the guy, you got to have a little respect. You know?
Yeah, well, this, of course, can be a lie to make Alexander the rightful legal heir of Persia, but it could also be true because this could be why Bessus retaliated against them. He could have told them that he was going to do this.
Oh, that is true. That does play.
Yeah, so Darius was known to be a very respectable man. And it's very likely that he was just like, I lost. You won. You're the ruler now, kind of thing.
I have a hole in my stomach. What am I going to do about
Yeah,
it?
well, that's what he was going to say before he got the hole in his stomach. And this guy's like, no, we're Persian. We're better than Greeks. So he, wanted to start a race war.
God damn it.
So, yeah, after his death, he the people believed it enough that he did get the throne to the Persian Empire. And historically, the Achaemenid Persian Empire is considered to have died with Darius, but some historians do consider Alexander the Great to be the last actual ruler of the empire. Because, like he did much other places, allow the people to keep on living. He didn't do anything to Persians.
Right.
He's like, you guys are just mine now. Like, I under my control, but you just keep doing your stuff. Alexander viewed this Bessus character as a usurper and did campaign against him, where he would end up exploring actually most of Central Asia during this time, which he kind of liked. He was very into exploring stuff, so he had a good time. And in 329 BCE, a man named Spitamenes would betray Bessus to Ptolemy, and Bessus was grabbed by Ptolemy and beheaded.
Yikers. Okay, well, that's what does. That's what happens.
That's what happens when you go, I'm Xerxes, and run away.
I feel like Alexander would have heard that news and just gone, huh.
well, that was unexpected.
Like, I guess that's that.
It's also said, historically, that when Darius got stabbed and the guy ran away, Alexander actually personally dropped his spear and shield and ran to help Darius. So, I feel like that also says
that.
something
I feel
about
like
his
is
person.
that. Yeah, that might be true, or that might be one of his yes men in the back.
Yeah,
like,
but I also,
Alexander,
based on the way he treated other leaders, and what we're going to see in the future too, you could have been like, oh fuck, dude. He also could have wanted Darius to be his general. So like,
he was really good,
exactly,
really smart.
Like he wanted Darius to be a companion. Like he wanted Darius to be with his army,
and that would probably gain a lot of respect for the hard right wingers of the Darius party.
So sometime later, Spitamenes would reform the nation of Scythia. He would say Scythia is an independent nation. This dude who betrayed the other betrayer would then betray Alexander, reforming the nation of Scythia, which hadn't been around for ages at this time, and lead an independent revolt against Alexander, who would have to personally return to the area and face him in battle, where Spitamenes was killed by his own men in the first battle before it started, in an effort to restore peace. And Scythia once again folded back into Alexander's empire.
No, everyone's just like, nah, man, Alexander's cool. We don't want to do this.
It's just it's a thing that happens a lot too in the Middle Ages, of just like old nations showing back up again.
Yeah,
where it's like Scythia
like,
had a little resurgence.
We're gonna bring back the glory of...
Yeah. We're the horse lords. Oh, we're dead. Fuck.
Fuck.
So during this time, Alexander actually started to use the Persian ways of court. This might have been due to already deep placement of noblemen being Persian, who already were used to Persian customs, and he did start ruling from Persia. That was kind of like his headquarters. Right. But he would start to use their customs. A famous one is the kiss the ring. That's where that comes from, which Greeks and Macedonians really hated. They did not like him doing this. His companions ridiculed him for this, and he eventually ended up stopping. He stopped it. He's like, okay, whatever, I'm done. You guys think it's
a fad? He tried it out. It's like fashion, basically.
Yeah. Eventually, he would have to recreate their monarchy entirely, so that so he wouldn't have to rely on the Iranian already noblemen. He wanted to have his own people, watching things. So he had to reform everything. And this is where a famous incident occurred in a drunken brawl, where Alexander and his companion Cletus the Black had at each other.
Oh yeah.
Which was because Cletus accused Alexander of forgetting what it meant to be a Macedonian, and that he had become a weak Persian. Ooh. So the two fought.
That's a little racist.
They had a brawl, and unfortunately, this ended in the death of Cletus the Black. So,
that's a shame.
Yeah, he said it was accidental. They were drunk, and he probably hit him in the head with his sword, which unfortunately usually kills a man. We talked about the drunk almost killing of him by his dad earlier, so it happened again.
Right.
And there was also a ton of...
That's a shame. I liked Cletus. He was a little racist at the end there, but...
Yeah, a little bit. But there was a ton of other assassination attempts at this time. There's even a whole Wikipedia article about the attempts at Alexander's life. for the same reasons. The people who were Greek and Macedonian did not like how Persian he was becoming. So he eventually stopped and just kind of went back to being Macedonian in his ways.
I mean, that's fine. That's I guess that's a good thing, even though I respect the man for trying to grow and evolve and, whatever. But, all right, loyalty is important, and his people wanted to make sure that you're still our dad, right?
Yeah, and it's just like he even apparently wore Persian clothing. So he stopped and went back to wearing his togas and breastplate that he had.
Yeah.
And he now,
comfy.
with Greece to Persia under his control, had the largest empire in the world, likely in history ever to this point.
Yeah, but I'm more interested in what was his wardrobe looking like at home, because that thing was probably fucking crazy.
Absolutely. We're actually going to talk about his home right now. We're going to talk about, he's been gone so long, what's been happening in Macedonia. Turns out dangerous things, because he left in charge one of his most trusted generals, Antipater. He was one of like the left hands of Philip II, his dad. So he was a very good soldier. So he left him in charge.
Fair enough.
And this time they were being attacked. Macedonia got attacked again from Greece.
What a surprise!
But this time it wasn't.
This is attempt number 3 or 4.
This is 3, but it wasn't the Thebians or the Athenians or anything like that before. It was the one people who never fully bent their knee to Alexander, which was Sparta.
Yep, that sounds about right.
The Spartans used an influx of troops from people who fled the besieged island of Tyre, and would use these to attack the Macedonians, thinking that they now had their chance to claim Greece in the absence of Alexander. Fortunately for Alexander, Antipater was not only a politician, but an extremely good military commander. So he would challenge the Spartan king, Aegeus III, in combat at the Battle of Megapolis.
Oh.
What?
I just know Aegeus III.
Yeah,
Just a name.
yeah. So Aegeus III fought with Antipater at the Battle of Megapolis, and they actually met allegedly in. So this is a famous battle, the Battle of Megapolis, where there was apparently a crater-like dent where both sides charged down at each other, like on foot.
Oh, I think I know
middle.
about this battle,
So,
which is why I know the name.
Yeah, they met in the middle, and right at the front of both forces were King Aegeus III, as Spartans do, have to lead in the front.
Oh, yeah.
And Antipater met the same way. He led in the front. So there was this battle going on, and they actually met in personal combat. And in the field, Antipater would slay the Spartan king. So,
Oof, that must have lost morale.
Yeah.
Although the Spartans are kind of prepared for that, but at the same time.
Well, the Spartans immediately surrendered, but you also have to keep in mind they weren't all Spartan. They were a lot of Tyrians, like I mentioned. They fled that island. They're like, fuck Macedonia. They killed us and sold my wife to slavery. So they really hated them.
Right.
But they immediately got thrashed by Macedonians again. And so the punishment to the Spartans was actually left up to the Greeks. Antipater's like, you take care of your own. I'm going back home. So the Greeks chose to pardon Sparta, put a new king in charge, which was a pro-Macedonian king. So they fell in with Alexander's forces.
That's how it's done.
Alexander would be demanding constant migration out of Macedonia to increase his power in lands he was conquering, and this worked well, as a lot of them actually chose to leave because they wanted the positions of power. Hey, come be a governor, come be a mayor, come be a,
Oh, boy.
So, people were given powerful jobs. And this worked well, but eventually there's just not enough Macedonians to go around. And this actually would lead to the fall of Macedonia in a couple hundred years in 171 BC, when they were invaded by these dudes called Romans. But that's a different part of history. We're going back to Alexander for the end of the episode, which is actually going to be his final conquest, which was into India.
Oh, fuck. I didn't actually know that.
He took over. He was taking India. So with Persia secured politically, Alexander continued to the lands that were touched by Persia, the Indian subcontinent, the very fringes of the Persian Empire. And he tried politics. He did not want to go to war at first. He invited all the chieftains from the former satrapy controlled by Persia to meet with him, submit. Let's be friends. We don't need to kill each other. Let's just be pals under my rule. And while one complied, the rest refused.
Well, I mean, they probably heard the rumors, but were like, that's so far away.
So that is likely what happened, because the leader who did comply was the border region, which was Ambi. It was his name. Ambi was the leader of Taxila. Ambi Taxil was his name, who submitted to Alexander with a generous offering of peace was granted the same title and lands he already held, like everyone else. He didn't lose any power really, and he also was gifted Persian robes, gold and silver ornaments, 30 Macedonian horses, and 1,000 talents of gold as a show that he never intended to lessen anyone's power who submitted to him. Ambi Taxil would prove to be a valuable ally, as he would actually not only give 5,000 men to Alexander's army, but he helped build a bridge over the Indus River, which would would allow him movement into India.
That dude knew exactly what Alexander was about. He's like, nah, man, I'm just not going to fuck with you. I'm just going to give you a hand. You're going to come in anyway. You are the storm. I am merely a tree for you to...
Also, I thought I put this in my script. I thought it was very funny that while the men rested in Taxil land, they noted that the food was exceptionally better. I just love the idea that they had like tandoori chicken. They're like, damn, this is better than ox jerky.
Holy shit! What do you guys eat this? This is amazing.
Yeah. I thought that was very funny. They were already seasoning their food back then. So, in May of 326 BCE, now Alexander, who was now officially Alexander the Great, would be meeting with Indian King Porus in battle at the banks of the Hydaspes River in Punjab, which is Pakistan.
Oh, yeah.
So Porus the Elder, as his name was a very respected Indian king, and in the opinion of Alexander, the most powerful army and leader of India, and he had to defeat him in order to move further east, and he could not afford to lose to show weakness to the other Indian tribes, if he wanted to retain loyalty to people like the Taxils, you know.
Right.
Porus was an extremely good tactician and chose the perfect location to halt Alexander's army at a river, which is now where they would have to prove in battle how good they were. Alexander had 40,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and likely a force of 5,000 Indian troops under the Taxils with him as well. And he faced 30,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 1,000 war chariots, and somewhere between 85 to 200 elephants.
That doesn't sound good. That's not good.
No. They're actually kind of evenly forces. Alexander had more people, but Porus held the terrain advantage and lined his troops across a river. The river
with elephants.
A big river. The Indus River is a big river. So so that was not like we can wade through it. And 200 elephants is no joke. Alexander led his troops up across the river facing the Indian forces and had his cavalry actually move far to the side of a flank to engage in a classic pincer maneuver. Alexander found a small wooded island in the river and hid his forces behind it for a few days, seemingly unnoticed by the Indian forces. He waded across the river with his men, and most of Alexander's army stayed behind under the command of his general Craterus, which allowed Alexander to sneak away with a small little force to cross the river. Porus would not find out about this crossing. Historians say that Alexander's ability to do so with 5,000 men was a feat so impressive that it had never been done and wouldn't be done until like the Victorian ages, a feat of that kind of size in a battle.
Damn.
We don't know exactly how they crossed the river because, again, you had to swim. You could not walk it. So it's likely they used the smaller boats that were cut in half and they kind of like rested on and kind of just drifted across the river, or floating hay bales where they would, again, just hold on to and cross the river. So they were like almost fully submerged, so they wouldn't be noticed.
Great. That sounds nuts.
5,000 people nuts. Doing that.
That's nuts.
That's ridiculous.
I know. That's what I'm trying to like. I'm like that's such a disadvantage. It's insanity.
Yeah. So Craterus,
the exhaustion you'd have just from getting across as well.
No,
like after you get across, you're fucking exhausted.
Greek troops wore armor.
Yeah.
Like that was like, so I don't know if their armor was off and sent separately, because that's possible. They could have just been nude and like holding on to the hay, on the other side. Then their armor could be like sent to them, kind of thing. Because if they were doing it, and mostly at night too, they could have done it that way. But
ropes helped probably.
Yeah, they probably did. Yeah, but they were trying to make as little noise as possible. Obviously, and with 5,000 men, that's hard to do.
I was gonna say ropes are quiet.
Yeah, so that might have been what they did. So Craterus would make multiple moves, seemingly failing to cross the river to raise Porus's confidence in his position. They were feigned attacks. Porus, thinking something was up, noticed these were Fanes and sent his son, Porus, of course, leading the chariots to see the 1,000 force of chariots to see what was happening on the other side of the field, which is where Alexander was sneaking. Fortunately, a massive storm broke out, blocking any view of the forces crossing in the heavy rain.
Wow. It's almost as if what's the storm god again?
Zeus, technically.
Keep going.
So,
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess.
So not only would that make the vision block, but it also would raise the water level, making it easier for Alexander to cross the river.
Oh, wow.
Alexander made it with all his troops, fully equipped, and horses. They didn't lose a single dude or horse, and landed and began advancing towards Porus's position. And he actually met with the chariot force and showered arrows upon them, starting the battle officially.
Yeah.
While his heavy cavalry charged the chariots, they were put at an immediate disadvantage because it was raining, which meant it was muddy. Horses can move freely in mud. Chariots can't move freely in mud.
Yep. Nope.
So Porus Jr. was killed in the battle and the first attack, and one chariot managed to get away and return to Porus, the king, with the news, where he would move his forces to face the best parts of his army to face Alexander. Now, Porus broke Indian tradition, which was to go into battle on a chariot. They had regal chariots that Indian troops would use. Porus instead strode to battle on elephant back.
Well, he needed to make an example of Alexander after killing his son.
So he not only was in an elephant, his elephant was fully armored, and he was fully armored in chainmail from head to toe, which chainmail was a brand new technology at this time. It was not heavily used, and it would not be heavily used until the Middle Ages, because it was just too heavy to wear. So since he wasn't moving on the back of an elephant, he was probably hooked onto the elephant too. He was able to do so. Indian troops, however, even the elites, wore very bright colors, making them easy to see, wielded axes and maces, and no armor. The elephants, because it's too expensive to make armor. Also, there's lack of supplies in that area. They didn't have as many iron mines and stuff, so didn't have as much.
Right. Actually, I didn't even think about that.
Elephants.
I played Civ. Come on, Pat.
Elephants were there, donning large structures on their back called howdahs. HOWDAH. If you search that, you'll know what it is. Think Lord of the Rings, like the Mumakils. They had those giant things in their back. Those are real. That's what That's how they did elephants. Archers could fire from safely from the top of these, as well as long spears or throwing spears could be used from the top of the elephants. The Macedonian heavy phalanx of elite warriors was outnumbered 5-1 in his initial encounter.
Oh, boy.
Because the army, remember, with Cratyrus' forces, had not crossed the river yet, so these guys were now facing the rest of this force alone, basically.
Hurry up!
But the lack of armor on Indian troops and them having axes, maces, meant they didn't have the range of the Greek spear, which gave them a severe disadvantage. Alexander sent horse archers to harass Indian cavalry and his heavy companion cavalry to take out the smaller Indian cavalry counterpart, while Alexander himself was on foot in this battle, leading the infantry in the front lines, and they charged in, as was his nature. The elephants in the rear of the army would soon receive news of the rider Indian cavalry and move into the field, but instead of facing the cavalry like Alexander thought they would, they went against the phalanx, which the beasts would cause massive losses to the infantry that were on the ground with these charging armored elephants coming in. And they were said to have...
I can't imagine.
The elephants were reported to have bodies piled onto their steel-bladed tusks.
Yeah. I can imagine.
So
it's like a shish kebab.
Yeah, it really was. And so this is a little minor content warning right now, because you're going to talk about what the Greeks did to these elephants. Because you have to do something at this point. So I
love elephants.
Yeah.
So sorry we used you for war in the past.
The way to take out an elephant is actually extremely difficult, as you might imagine, and requires extreme levels of accuracy to throw a javelin in their eye.
Ugh.
So elephants have very thick skulls. So if you hit a javelin in the eye of an elephant, it doesn't go through the back, but it does remove the eye. So these elephants would get blinded or semi-blinded, become extremely mad and enraged. So what would happen at this point is when the mahouts would become an important part. Now, what a mahout is is a elephant rider. And they were equipped with poisoned rods where they would stab their own elephants in the neck to stop them from being enraged and kill them in the battlefield.
They do that in Total War Rome, too.
Do they?
I think so.
Oh.
I remember, like, the elephants dying after a while, even if no one killed them.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what
it's because if they got enraged, you would put them down because it wouldn't turn your own on your own forces. But it seemed like, likely due to having Indian allies on his team, he was informed of this. So his men knew with their archers and slings and javelins to kill the mahout first before blinding the elephant. So what would happen is these elephants, now absolutely enraged, turned on their own troops, killing hordes of Indian soldiers, hordes of Indian cavalry, and basically wiping out their entire army on their own.
Yeah. Those poor elephants.
Yeah. So these beasts were rampaging like crazy against these men and just slaughtering their own, both sides. But it's likely they were turning because of the weight on their back was forcing them to turn against their own men instead of face the enemy they were facing. And at the same time, the Craterus' troops successfully crossed the river. Now, this led for a classic thing we like to call a strategy, the hammer and anvil, where Alexander was the anvil and Craterus was the hammer as they came behind, entirely encircling this massive Indian army and slaughtering them to the last.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Who did make it out, though? King Porus made it out on his elephant. With a small force of guard because they saw where this was coming and they got away. And Alexander is said to have grown an extreme admiration for Porus in this battle because he knew that he intended to die in combat rather than be captured and went to go form another army. But he wanted to stop this conflict and he wanted to get Porus as not only a respected leader but a general in his own army. He wanted Porus to be with him. So he sent word to Porus, sending actually Taxiel, the guy who's on his side, as an envoy to him, where Porus, apparently before Taxiel could finish speaking, threw a spear at him, causing him to have to flee the battlefield. And when Alexander received news that Porus wasn't very kind to messengers, he sent more.
Be my friend, be my friend, be my friend, be my friend. I'm sorry.
It's said by up to the 13th messenger who arrived, Porus finally climbed down from his elephant, only asking for water. Alexander apparently rode out himself to a instance that's actually a famous thing. There's a lot of paintings of it called the Surrender of Porus, where Porus did surrender after dehydration, basically needing water joined up with him. And Porus ended up actually causing more damage than any foe before him, greater than not only Darius but the legendary Menmon of Rhodes we talked about earlier. Alexander lost 1,000 men in battle, which was the highest figure yet for his army at this time.
Damn, that's not a lot for him.
No,
actually.
That is a lot for him. But you know how much the Indians lost?
That's a lot for him, but
23,000.
How much? That's a big number.
Alexander would receive 70 war elephants as tribute to this piece, and he found 2 cities, naming one Bucephala after his horse we mentioned in the first episode died around this time. So he named the city. He founded the city Bucephala after it, and the other Nike, after the goddess of victory, Nike, the Roman Greek goddess.
Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Which, fun fact, if you don't know, the Nike logo is actually the holy symbol of the god Nike.
Is that true?
Yes,
Is that really true?
Yes, it is. So
no fucking way.
It is the goddess of victory. If you look it up, you'll be like, oh, yeah, you're right. That is the Nike logo.
I have to look
It's just simplified.
Right,
it's a simplified version of it, but you'll see it. So actually, the city Nike is actually thought to be modern-day Mong in Punjab. It's still a Pakistani city today. So it's still around. Founded by Alexander the Great.
It's the wing.
It's the wing. It's the wing of
Sorry,
Nike.
That's
yeah.
So fucking funny. Yeah. Okay.
So just do it.
Just do it.
Alexander was also enamored with Porus's elephant, his personal elephant. I think he thought it was really pretty with all the armor and stuff. So he actually dedicated the elephant to Helios, the god of the sun, naming it Ajax.
Cool.
And the elephant the elephant bore golden tusk rings, which had an inscription on them reading, "Alexander, the son of Zeus, dedicates Ajax to Helios."
Looking out for you, bro.
Yeah, so pretty cool.
Some elephants were treated like gods, others not so
Others
much.
had javelins in the eye. The battle was won, but the Hellenic forces were not having it. They had been campaigning for years and wanted to go home, and they were exhausted. Alexander tried to push his forces to the river Ganges, but when they arrived and saw the river, they literally refused and got to a point of mutiny. Alexander decided, you know what? You guys are right. Let's go home. So he turned south, where his men would actually take a few towns just to secure the riverbed and siege the city of Mali, which would be the last battle Alexander ever took place in. It wasn't really a battle. He just kind of died. Which ends us to the finale, which is part 5 of this episode, which is his return, where Alexander returned to Persia, discovering his satraps had been naughty boys and executed most of them.
Oh, yikes.
Just, reaffirming his rule. He returned to the city of Susa, where he met with his entire army, thanked them for their service to the empire, and paid off all their debts they owed. All overaged and disabled men were sent home to Macedon, or whatever Greek land they came from. He would then travel to the land of Ecbatana, which is where most of his treasure was being stored at, which is one of the Babylonians' biggest cities. Where he and his friend Hephaestion would actually die of illness or poisoning. We don't know which, but he would die here. It was his closest companion. Apparently, it was Ptolemy and Hephaestion were like his two best friends growing up. So in Babylon, there was a large funeral pyre, which was commissioned for his closest companion, and a national day of mourning was held. He began to plan a new campaign to secure Arabia and lay out the groundworks for his next invasions. On June 10th or 11th, we don't know which, of 323 BCE, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, Alexander the Great would die at the age of 32. How did he die? We don't know.
Oh, yikers.
It is a mystery, but there is some historical accounts of Alexander's death. One states that he spent 2 days drinking with Nearchus, which was his admiral, and he developed a fever, which would worsen by the day, and eventually lost the ability to speak and died of illness. The second account is that he got struck with agony after downing a large bowl of unmixed wine in honor of Heracles, and would die after 11 days of weakness following the rite. Many also propose he was poisoned, as that was the way of things in the Macedonian aristocracy, and before his death, he had removed Antipater as viceroy, due to his mother, Olympias, convincing him that he was ruining the country in his absence.
I imagine that would always go on if you're far away from home.
So many historians in the centuries following did put Antipater at the head of the plot of Alexander's assassination, if there was one, but it was never confirmed. Right. So he never got, there was no confirmation of this.
I mean, there were so many cases of just people dying because of sicknesses back then that it really could have been he got drunk with his buddy too many nights in a row.
Yeah, he could have got drunk with his buddy, stubbed his toe outside, got infected, and died. He could have drank unmixed wine in a ceremony to Heracles, and it just was, germ theory.
Extreme food poisoning.
There you go.
Yeah. No, I mean, because people definitely wanted him dead for sure. Yeah. So that's definitely a pot. Like, if they ever made a show about Alexander the Great, they should definitely leave that open ended.
Yeah. Which, by the way, HBO would be a great show. So,
oh my God, can you imagine?
Yeah, it'd be so good. Such a good story. Alexander was laid to rest in a gold anthropod sarcophagus that was filled with honey, and then placed in a gold casket. The funeral procession was to carry his body all the way back to Macedon, but his body was actually seized by Ptolemy en route for reasons unknown and taken to Memphis instead, where he would receive a pharaoh's burial. His successor, Ptolemy II, would transfer the body to Alexandria, where it would rest for many years. Ptolemy IX, many years later, and one of the last successors of Ptolemy, would replace the sarcophagus with one of glass and melt down the original into coins.
Whoa.
The tomb would remain in Alexandria and be visited by many people, such as Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Caligula, over the years, to pay respect and take pieces of the body or sarcophagus as like a holy symbol, basically. But at the year 200 AD, we lost track of the tomb, and all details as to where Alexander remains today are a mystery.
Yeah, he seems like one of those figures that transcends, reality in some ways.
Yeah, you can watch Moon Knight. They said they found his body in Moon Knight.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's why it's a big deal. It's like, oh shit, it's Alexander the Great. Yeah, that's the end of Alexander. That's his story.
That was really fun. I think what my favorite part is what we were talking about earlier in terms of his education.
Yeah.
Like at that time, somebody who kind of has that type of both philosophical and like scientific as well. You know what I mean? Like understanding at least at that point, like the stars and, you know, back then too, you had to have such practical skills. And like the truth is a lot of practical skills like hunting and construction and engineering, even to the basic degrees, they teach you about the earth and the planet and all these kind of things. So I can imagine between, you know, his education and being such a doer, like literally he did so much shit.
A big thing too is that Aristotle was a mathematician as well. So he was taught math, which people think is a very big deal when sieging cities. And knowing how things work and being able to figure out how long do they have to live in this wall, how big are the walls. He can actually help his engineers do stuff, you know, which makes them like him more as well. So and even just being a student of philosophy makes you a deep thinker, so you're able to understand things more. So
exactly, and I do what like. Maybe not all of them. Obviously, embellishments are definitely there.
Yeah.
There's obviously those are there, but I do think that for the time he probably was fairly progressive. You know, again, he was a monarch.
It's like we were saying earlier. In a land of 1,000 kings, they're going to be bad. They're mostly bad people who want power. Alexander seemed to just kind of want to just have this big land. He wanted to be famous. Obviously, he wanted to be a legend, and he did.
Yeah.
And also a little post bit on that about this. We might even, I don't know if we're going to talk about more in other future episodes in this whole series, but Alexander the Great would be a figure of major importance for the next 1,000 years. He would be like, people would found kingdoms under the belief they were his progeny. So it was a whole thing. Having the blood of Alexander the Great in your veins was like a holy thing in the Crusades, in the founding of a lot of German states in Europe and Greek states in Europe and Byzantium and all that stuff, and Rome. Like just saying like, oh, I'm related to Alexander the Great. They weren't, probably, but they said they were, and they had fake documents lining up saying like, oh, look, they were in Bulgaria. They're his family 700 years ago. That kind of thing. It's just like that was a huge deal. So claiming Alexander the Great remained a major historical figure for the Roman Empire. They were obsessed with him. The Byzantium, New Rome was obsessed with him. In the Vatican had a big thing for Alexander the Great, even though he was a pagan. Like it's just like he was a huge deal for 1,000 years after his death. So that's. I
mean, I'd argue he's still kind of a big deal today.
Historically, yes, but like as far as like moving and shaking the world, he still remained. Even though he was dead for 1,000 years, and people were still using his name to claim the lands he took over, and much less fairly than he did, for that record.
Oh, I'm sure.
But that's the end of the Alexander series.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I hope you all enjoyed listening to that, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.